In this podcast, I'm going to argue something which is a bit left field, but I think will help give an explanation for what seems to be something that's almost insane or incomprehensible. And it's a common question that springs to people's mind when looking at the state of modern politics. The essence of this will bring in poor old Jason Arday yet again, but more as an item of evidence rather than the central tragic actor. And I'm going to try and explain how ideology cast him down at Cambridge, and then how ideology then found it profitable, having seen the reputation of an individual turn from being an asset into a liability after his death, to resurrect him. So they used him twice. First time was to elevate him to a rank which, poor fellow, he couldn't really sustain at Cambridge. I say poor fellow, but a lot of people condemn him, and he was by no means innocent. The world is full of chances. But if you're surrounded by people who persistently tell you that whatever ridiculous thing you claim is true, it can be quite hard for many people to give up the possibility of getting unimaginable status and a lot of money into a deal too. So I did it pretty well like that. What he failed was that he couldn't keep it up. The higher he went, the more he pressed those buttons, the more he was being enticed to set himself up for a fall. The people most responsible, not Arday, it's the academics who used him, King Lear style, flies and all. So, the title of this attempt, certainly it was for me to get my ducks in a row to be able to start getting my mind around all this. In the process of writing, it did the trick. And I hope it will help you too when you listen to it. The title of this is Why Left-Wingers Ally with Religious Imperialists Who, when the fight's won, are slaughtered for their naivete. Ugly little title, I know, but it does seem rather weird how left-wing ideologues who ostensibly are very keen on rights for women and gays and so on and so forth, and rightly so, yet ally themselves to people who seem to have exactly the opposite opinions, to the point of being murderous. Gay people, for instance, being thrown off buildings and such like. It's grotesque. So here we go. To normal people who've not surrendered their agency to ideology, and even those who label themselves right-wing, the alliance of the left with ideologically authoritarian wannabe theocracy is bewildering. I'm going to explain why people seem to be walking into a trap with eyes wide open and yet wide shut, and why successive governments, Tory and Labour, seem to have been so willing, to the point of enthusiasm, to drag tens of millions of UK citizens, many of them legacy immigrants from the 20th century, towards distrust, division, open Balkan-style conflict and social destruction. The sight of female NGOs and charities flocking to the French coast to encourage hundreds of thousands over several years to enter the UK, to declare that they're seeking asylum and automatically become a major burden on the legacy culture and society, which nearly all despise and have no intention of joining, is almost beyond belief, except that it's really happening. Ideology has so reduced them that they have surrendered any agency they once had and are blind to the fact that most of the new arrivals they shepherd consider them so low and impure that it's fair game, given the chance, to behave in any way they choose towards them. Why else did the UK government publish that "Don't Rape Women and Children" leaflet for specific distribution to new arrivals? The Iranian Revolution that turned the country into a dictatorial theocracy was created thanks to an unholy alliance, unwitting to the left wing, between revolutionary students and clerics. When the Shah fell, instead of better government, almost the first thing the clerics did was to execute around 30,000 students. So much for loyalty and good intentions. They were useful fools, no longer useful, needing to be executed to ensure they did not hinder progress towards the population preparing for the life to come in an ideologically correct, religious and socially observing society. To normal people, left-wingers, gays, lesbians and others enthusiastically supporting theocratic imperialism are like turkeys voting for Christmas. But this unholy alliance is happening, and here is why. Marxist ideology and derived variants share a brutal utilitarian mentality with some forms of extreme ideological religion. The behaviour of many left-wing journalists before and after the death of Jason Arde is telling. Novara media journalists who had mildly criticised Arde as a conman, in good company with New York Times and The Guardian, other lefty publications observing different but similar peculiarities in Arde, faced the full force of ideological threat. After the vigil of correct thinking resurrected the man ideology has cast down at Cambridge University, declared him akin to George Floyd, they were in the firing line as potential ideological apostates. Pretty grim stuff. All ideology has two prime objectives: survival and propagation. This is critical. If an asset, through no fault of their own, turns into a liability, they must be crushed. Cambridge University jettisoned Arde the second the scales tipped, doubtless due to a massed chorus of outraged alumni. The left turned his memory into a useful tool to focus victimhood. The aim was to create a greater division in the hope of initiating race warfare to accelerate the destruction of legacy society, making way for socialist heaven on earth, thanks to the reign of ideological purity. Simple, brutal, utilitarian principle applied with the extra plus that artificial martyrdom of the man Cambridge jettisoned could mask the guilt of those who had treated him with what amounted to systemic cruelty. Christians did not blame Rome. Likewise, academia hopes to get off the hook, but their victim was rather more flawed. He was set up for fall by those who did the ideological calques to be rid the moment his presence could harm the progress of survival and propagation of the ideology that stripped them of agency. All ideologues want to manipulate and, where necessary, force everyone into the same slave mentality that controls their thinking, isolating them from humanity, convincing them that anything can be moral, including mass murder a la Stalin, should it be necessary. Dishonesty to get people to deny their humanity is essential, because no one in their right mind, knowing what's going down, would ever voluntarily agree to give up their agency and turn into a slave. Ideological logic can be so callous as to accept that collateral deaths of innocent people consequent to ideologically correct activity are quite acceptable. After all, if they died in the name of progress to heaven on earth, or in the name of God, gods, or other religious entities, such deaths of the innocent or true believers are morally pure. The edict of Pope Urban XI in 1095 springs to mind. Given the prime objectives of ideology, left or right, the almost suicidal alliance of left-wingers who want to be a religious dictatorship is explicable. Both consist of groups who've surrendered political, social and moral agency to thought-controlling ideological algorithms. In effect, they control thinking without critical intervention of consciousness. A silly analogy would be like the dark web of the internet, where all kinds of hidden this and that corruption or political intrigues lurk. The thinking of ideologues and religious zealots, their minds divorced from consciousness, make the most immoral cruelty quite acceptable. A manner of artificial psychopathy appears. We all know Stalin was at times sorrowful that he had to kill people for the greater good. Ironically, many wretches in Lubyanka, hours before execution, wrote him letters asking him the irrelevant question, "What have I done wrong?" The answer that never came would have been, "Nothing, but you're no longer an asset but a liability, so you must die." Because ideology must survive and spread above all else. Exactly the same ghastly calculation applies in ideological religion. All religions are capable of moderation in the name of humanity. I do not subscribe to their elimination, but hope that they might cease forever interfering in politics. The unholy alliance of the ideological left wing with the religious ideologues is that they both have surrendered human agency to ideology. Both have the same priorities, and both are happy to condone collateral death of true believers and the innocent in pursuit of the prime objectives of ideology. They're slaves, think themselves slaves, all fighting the fight of the just and pure against evil subhuman creatures responsible for the weight of injustice heaped upon them. Committed slaves curse anyone with a mind rejecting ideology or religious imperial ambition with one voice. Come liberation, when the oppressors are cast down and the slaves set upon one another in a brutal utilitarian struggle to determine which pure and perfect society is to arise from the ashes and who is to be thrown to the ideological mincer of asset-turned liability. This is very much like Cambridge corporate culture. They, metaphorically, threw our day into the mincer. The cause of the strange and terrible alliance of the left and religious imperialism is because they think and don't think so much alike. Both are uncompromising because although they do not control critical aspects of thinking, their being, their conscious existence is totally dependent on the process of thinking. I think, hence I am, never went away. Ideology has an inbuilt advantage of existential threat to keep the faithful in check. Again, that's pretty ghastly when you think about it. We're faced by a slave revolt. The only thing out of the ordinary is that the slavery is artificial and self-induced, making the revolt spectacularly delusional, self-induced and criminally self-defeating. This is off the scale artificial stupidity. Now those gays, far from all, in full support of religious ideologues who would hurl them off high buildings, and liberal, capital L, women, so keen on those who would force them into social imprisonment, keen to back religious imperialism, are understandable. You need only see the hostage-style struggle sessions of the sad and desperate Novara media journalists denying the truth to be allowed to stay in the ideological left fold. They know the merciless grinder of ideological utility was ready to mince their social lives, and if they should be sufficiently vulnerable, to go the same way as Jason Arday. The media didn't kill the man who Cambridge University played with, flies and all, as I said, King Lear style. Ideology, with all its cruel, mechanistic utilitarianism, murdered him. If you understand such strange things are possible, the tears of fear on the face of one of the Novara media journalists, cringing an apology for speaking the truth, now appear far from pathetic. You need courage, determination, and frequently sufficiently little to lose to break from class, caste, and ideological servility. Ideology mercilessly exploits anyone who doesn't or can't make the grade. Ideology is the greatest enemy of humanity. It's cruel, mechanistic. It killed and resurrected RJ to destroy a liability, and then went on to use him in death a second time. Ideology imposes inhuman conformity while stripping people of agency, a key part of humanity itself. Left-wing ideologues and the religious imperialists are equally frightened, pathetic, and dangerous slaves. The tears of Bastani tumbled down his face. It was harrowing and a ghastly sight of a journalist who knew he had to deny truth in order to avoid being minced by the ideologically correct, acting to dispose of an apostate. The final utility being in the form of pour encourager les autres. And there we go. It's a miserable business. I really do wonder where it's all going to end. But I think once we get to grip on what ideology is all about, we'll get beyond the feeling that all of this is just ghastly. I think in this brief podcast I managed to square the circle. Thanks for listening.